Hi, my name is Kathy. I have a PhD in psychology and 9 years experience working in the trauma space. My graduate work focused on how we form and express fear memories. And over the last 4 years, I've been working with trauma survivors using trauma-sensitive yoga as a therapy to reduce their symptoms. Today, I want to talk about trauma responses, so how we react to trauma. And these are automatic responses. These are automatic body and mind reactions. And they serve to protect us from events that could kill us or shatter our sense of reality or our sense of self. So for anyone who has suffered trauma, the experience of bearing witness to their body and mind going into autopilot beyond their control can add a whole nother layer of trauma to an event that's already horrific. So I want to talk about this today to offer some insight to those who are lucky enough to have never experienced trauma. But this is also for the trauma survivors, so that you might have a framework that's possibly helpful for understanding your experiences. So it's not uncommon to think that there are 3 trauma responses: fight, flight, and freeze, sometimes called immobilize. But the work I'm going to discuss today suggests that there are at least 6. Freeze, fight, flight, fright, flag, and faint. So I'll go through them in order. So firstly, freeze. If we come across an event that puts our life in danger, we'll often freeze first to assess the situation. So here we become really hypervigilant, really aware of what's going on around us. And that gives us a chance to figure out whether we should fight or flight. So we might look around, maybe there's a perpetrator. We might make judgments about how big they are, how strong they are. Could we win if we had to fight? Or we might look around to see if there's a way out. Is there a way to escape? Can we flight? Maybe it's not there. Maybe there is no way out. So we might start to form strategies of how we're going to fight, how we're going to survive this. And then from there, that's when we transition into fight or flight. So you might have heard of fight or flight before. It's often mentioned in regards to stress, but a traumatic fight or flight is quite different from a stress response. It's much more prolonged, lasts way longer, and it's much stronger. So to understand traumatic fight or flight in general, you need to understand just a little bit of physiology. So fight or flight is governed by the autonomic nervous system, which is aptly named because it functions automatically. It's in our periphery, so it's outside of the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. So for today, there's 2 arms of the autonomic nervous system which are of interest for today's video. And they're the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic division governs things like rest and digest. So when that becomes active, blood flow is sort of moved into digestive organs. We start to break down food, which is used for recovery. Our muscles start to rebuild. We rest, we relax. And then the sympathetic division covers fight or flight. So it's the opposite. So blood flow moves away from digestive organs into muscles, sort of readying us for action. Our heart rate can increase, our breathing rate can increase. Our muscles, again, become really active, ready to respond, so much so that we might start shaking. And then we use this energy to fight or flight, to escape the event. But if that is unsuccessful, or if fight or flight is not available, then we start to experience increased sense of fear, of terror, of panic. And these are really extreme emotions, and they correspond with major shifts in how our nervous system responds. So typically, just going back to the autonomic nervous system, typically the two branches work in balance. So when one's active, the other is inactive, and vice versa. So we're either resting and digesting, or we're sort of fight or flighting, and so they swing backwards and forwards. Now, when we start to enter into this phase where fight or flight hasn't worked, both branches of the autonomic nervous system become active. So our nervous system is thrown out of balance. And from here, we enter into our fourth stage, which is fright. So the increased muscle tension that we experienced during fight or flight to ready us for action can become so strong and we become paralyzed, like literally frozen with fear or scared stiff. And it's thought that this reaction serves to protect us. So if we're still, maybe we won't be noticed. But as this happens, we can start to experience feelings of being dizzy, blurred vision. We might start to become physically numb, might start to feel nauseous, like in an overall sense that what's happening isn't actually real. And then from here, we can transition into the fifth response, which is flag, sometimes called immobilization. So here, there is another shift in how our nervous system responds, and the parasympathetic nervous system becomes more active. And that's the rest and digest system. But it becomes so active that it shifts us into a state of shutdown. And here we're unable to move, but unlike the rigid tension that we experienced before, our muscles become really limp. And our pain tolerance increases. We might actually not feel anything that's going on in our body, become really numb, and we might not be able to speak or hear what's going on. And then on top of that, like there's a shift in how we're consciously sort of experiencing everything. So we might feel that it's not actually us that's there, that we're just sort of witnessing the event from the outside. And our ability to form memories during this time is reduced. So that means that when we try and recall the event later on, it's really difficult, if not impossible. And so from here, I guess it's worth pointing out that this really is where we sort of dissociate. So we lose a sense of being there, like physically and mentally. And then from there, there's the sixth response, which is fainting. So we might lose consciousness altogether. And it's thought that this, in a way, is a kindness because, and again, in a way, we're kind of removed from the situation. We don't feel that we're there physically and mentally. So it's, in a way, like a survival response. So there are the six responses to trauma. I'll link the paper that I got this from below, so you can have a look at that. And as you can see, that these responses are there to promote our survival. So firstly, we would freeze just to assess the situation, to figure out how we're going to cope, fight or flight to get away from the situation. If that doesn't work, we again sort of freeze, we go into fright. And then if that doesn't work, we're progressively sort of removed from the situation, sort of physically and mentally. But for those that who have been diagnosed with PTSD or are experiencing PTSD, these reactions, these responses are persistent and they become their symptoms of PTSD. Now, it's worth noting here that what I've discussed is a trauma cascade or trauma response cascade that is associated with sort of one sort of key trauma event, like a car crash or like a mugging or something like that. But the trauma responses associated with things like complex trauma and developmental trauma or complex PTSD, they're different again. So there's additional responses, and they will be the topic of future videos. So if you made it here, thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this interesting or helpful, please feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. I like to make videos on sort of a range of topics, including emotion, memory systems, trauma-sensitive yoga and how it works as a therapy, other body-based therapies for mental health, and of course, physical and mental reactions to trauma. So if these are of interest to you, please feel free to subscribe. And thanks again.